Chief Rabbi Sacks, why are you calling?
Guys, will you join me on the next stage of my journey? How do you plan your time? First thing you do is plot holidays.
Writing's a bit like Shachret Mincha Mariv. It comes and you have to kind of do it whether you want to or not. Why do you write like you're running out of time? Whether it was because of the cancer that he had in his 40s, he felt like from that point on, like the clock was ticking.
There was nothing left to chance.
There was never a car ride that we went on where he didn't have something printed off in a folder that he was reading and editing. You had to be very comfortable in silence, in the knowledge that that was time well spent. You are empowered to say no.
He used to tell us, he said, compliments are fine, just don't inhale.
He didn't look for praise, although there was plenty coming his way. He looked for areas of improvement.
He said to us, guys, I can't carry on.
It was just a remarkable ride, one that finished far too soon. His legacy will inspire not just our generation, but generations to come.
41 books, more than 750 essays, in addition to many hundreds of speeches, radio broadcasts, videos, and letters, in just 31 years. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks was born in 1948 and died in 2020 at the young age of 72. In his early 40s, he survived cancer, and since then, he's been writing prolifically. Friends, just do the math. Rabbi Sacks is not only one of the most influential religious and spiritual leaders of the Jewish people, but also one of the most productive public intellectuals of our generation. Indeed, the stature of Rabbi Sacks emanates from the quality and quantity of his work. Today, we're going behind the scenes to explore how Rabbi Sacks became the giant leader that he is. How did he sustain such an output within the finite limits of time? What was the structure of his days, weeks, months, and years? How did he uphold his discipline, motivation, and focus, balancing study, writing, public service, and personal life? How was he inspired and then honed his ideas? I am a big admirer of Rabbi Sacks and had the honor of meeting him a few times in his office. In December 2019, just before COVID, Betty and I hosted him for a community event in our home during what turned out to be his last visit to the United States. By that time, Rabbi Sacks frequently spent time with royals, dignitaries, and the world's most successful and famous people. But to our home, he came with one assistant and no formalities. The point of the story is that the team of Rabbi Sacks was tiny, consisting of a handful of people. Two of them join us today. Joanna Benarroch and Dan Sacker served as longtime assistants to Rabbi Sacks, and they will help us understand how this luminary sustained such extreme intellectual productivity over such a long time. Joanna and Dan, welcome. Joanna Benarroch was born and raised in England. She began her career in the early 1990s in Jewish education, working for Jewish continuity in the UK. In 1997, she joined the office of the chief rabbi and began a 24-year-long collaboration with Rabbi Sacks. As his executive director, she played a central role in orchestrating his public, intellectual, and religious commitments. Following Rabbi Sacks' retirement from the chief rabbinate in 2013, Joanna transitioned to co-manage his private office, from which he effectively operated as chief rabbi of the entire English-speaking world. After Rabbi Sacks' passing in 2020, Joanna became the global CEO of the Rabbi Sacks Legacy to lead the expansion of his intellectual and educational reach, including the digitization of his work and engagement with schools and communities worldwide. Dan Sacker was born and raised in the UK. After earning a degree in politics and modern history from the University of Manchester, he completed a master's in political management at George Washington University. Along the way, Dan worked with Senator Joe Lieberman and served as national chair of the Union of Jewish Students in the UK. In 2011, he became senior advisor to Rabbi Sacks, which included contributing to some of his major works, like the book Morality. After Rabbi Sacks' passing, Dan co-founded the Rabbi Sacks Legacy, where he is now a trustee. For his day job, he serves as Senior Director at Milltown Partners. Joanna and Dan, let's dive in. It's great to have you today.
Great
Thank
to be
you
with
so
you,
much,
Gidi.
Gidi.
Thanks.
So, I just want to start with the basic questions for each of you. And that is, what was the path that led you to eventually working so closely with Rabbi Sacks? Maybe we start with you, Joanna, because you were there first.
Thank you, Gidi. So I grew up in the UK. Came from a very communally minded family, and I had the most amazing opportunity. An amazing lady called Simma Weinberg approached me around the Shabbat table to say, we're setting up a new organization called Jewish Continuity. Are you interested in applying? It was Rabbi Sacks's first major project that he created as chief rabbi. When he became chief rabbi, he had the idea that he was very, very concerned that Anglo Jewry was going to go the same way as American Jewry, that assimilation would rise, outmarriage, that community would shrink. And we were already a far smaller community, obviously, because we're a much smaller country than the United States.
Just to say that there are 300,000 Jews, roughly speaking, in the UK.
280,000.
Which is about the number of Jews that live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, just so people have a scale of what we're talking about. In New York, there's 1.6 million. So just the audience sense of scale.
Tiny. But the percentages. So when Rabbi Sacks became chief rabbi, the outmarriage percentage was about 22%, and in the States it was already climbing to about 50%. And he was watching it. He was someone who didn't look just at tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. He was looking 20, 30, 40 years ahead to think about what did we need to do and to invest in our community now to sustain it for the future. So he was never about tomorrow. So this was something that really bothered him. And one of the things that he did when he became chief rabbi was he wrote a series of pamphlets called Jewish Continuity, and he wrote a book called Will We Have Jewish Grandchildren? And that's where I came in. So he set up this organization to revitalize the Jewish community in the UK. He wasn't just about going to school, going to shul. He wanted to have a revitalization of Jewish culture in the United Kingdom and sort of shock the community. He said they look through rose-colored spectacles at the wonderful way that life used to be, and he wanted to make them realize that if they carried on the way they were going, our community was going to shrink. So he set up an organization called Jewish Continuity, and that was in 1993. He became chief rabbi in 1991. And I joined this organization. It was the most amazing environment. It was led by the indomitable Clive Lawton, who was also a Jewish communal leader, and he was brought in specifically for this task. And I had 3.5 incredible years in Jewish Continuity. That was then taken under the banner of the UJIA, a bit like the UJA Federation in the States, but much smaller, obviously. And I joined the Chief Rabbi's office in 1997. I have to tell you a funny story because I lived Jewish Continuity whilst I worked for Jewish Continuity. So I had my second child whilst I was working for Jewish Continuity. And I went to my interview with Rabbi Sacks whilst he was chief rabbi, pregnant with number 3, with a broken ankle. And I'm still here to tell the tale. Don't know what that tells you, but...
Joanna, and then when Rabbi Sacks retired from being the chief rabbi of British Jewry, you continued with him and basically led his office as...
So he approached Dan and I actually in 2011 and said, guys, I am not waiting till I'm 70 to step down. I have a lot of work to do. So at 65, so he was 63. At 65, I'm stepping down. Guys, will you join me on the next stage of my journey? And how could we refuse such an incredible offer? We had no idea what we were letting ourselves in for, but it was the best journey of our lives, I think. Anyway, that's what.
Dan, what's your short story about getting to work with Rabbi Sacks before we dive into the life next to him, by his side?
So I describe myself as the newbie in this partnership with Joanna, in that I only worked for him for 10 years. But my first interaction with him was I didn't go to a Jewish school. I was brought up in a frum traditional household, but I didn't go to a Jewish school. And I didn't go to yeshiva. My entry point into Judaism was always through kind of sort of books and his writings, and that was sort of my first kind of experience with him. So I was very much a groupie before I was an employee. I used to follow him around. I used to go to the shiurim, etc. And it was really sort of a university. I was in Manchester University, and I got very involved in the Jewish Society. And we're talking sort of 2000. I started in September 2001. Right, so campus at that point, post 9/11, was a very difficult place for Jewish students. Manchester, in particular, there was actually a motion at the student union that was sort of trying to equate Zionism and racism, and I was head of the Jewish students and sort of ran a campaign there to make sure that the motion failed. But during that motion, one day my phone went, and it was a withheld number, and I picked it up, and there was this rather familiar voice at the end of the line going, is this Dan? I'm like, yes, but like, Chief Rabbi Sacks, why are you calling? And obviously the voice, everyone knows the voice, right? So I pick up the phone and he said, look, I just want to tell you, I know what's going on in Manchester. The community knows. We are 100% behind you. Whatever you need me to do, just tell me. And I just want to give you some chizuk. And it was like the most amazing kind of thing. Like, here was I, like my second term at university, whatever. The guy that I followed, that I sort of, for me, epitomized Judaism and the Jewish life and values that I believed in. And he's calling me out just to say, hey, you're having a tough time. How are you doing? And so it was from there, and I got more involved in Jewish student life. I eventually was elected to be chairman of the Union of Jewish Students, which is the equivalent of Hillel in the UK. And as part of that, I would go into the then Chief Rabbi's office sort of once every 6 or 7 weeks, and I would sit down with Rabbi Sacks for an hour and brief him on what was going on campus life for the students. He passionately cared about student life, and he knew that university was like that, the pincer edge of the sword when you're away from home and you can kind of go either way. And he really invested time in them and in us as the leadership. And sort of after UJS, I had a number of different opportunities to go into the community, but I sort of decided to take myself away, and I went to America and I did a master's in political management at George Washington University. And it was there that I first kind of realized that this person kind of transcended the UK. Everyone was like, oh, you know Rabbi Sacks? And I was like, well, yeah, I like had regular meetings with him, and they were like, what? And I didn't realize quite who he was, to be honest, until I left the UK. And when I came back, I went into sort of political lobbying, sort of kept my contacts with Joanna in the office, and sort of eventually in about 2011, late 2010, early 2011, Rabbi Sacks kind of called me up and was like, look, I want a director of comms, someone to kind of come in and work in the office. And I remember sort of having coffee with him and saying to him, look, I obviously, yes, I want to work for you. If it's only for 2 years, then that's great, because I know that you're stepping down in 2013, but this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I said, but for me personally, the really exciting stuff comes with what you do next, and I want to help you with that. And he sort of said, like, down one step at a time. And then about a year later, as Joanna said, he called us into the office and said, like, he wanted the two of us to stay with him. And Joanna's absolutely right. Like, it was the blessing of a lifetime to be as close to him as we were for as long as we were. And it was just a remarkable ride, one that finished far too soon.
Yeah, so basically we all know, and we mentioned that Rabbi Sacks passed away in November 2020 from the illness of cancer, but there's a story that he actually had cancer when he was in his early 40s. And at that time, he sort of had these kind of reflections about his life. And he said to himself, if I don't make it, what is my legacy? And coming out of this illness, he decided that his legacy is going to be his writings and his teachings and effectively his books. And then he was able to publish almost a book a year over a 30-year period. That's an incredible story. My question is it true?
So I'll tell you, Gidi. There was we all know the musical Hamilton.
Yes.
Right. One of probably our favorites. It was definitely one of Rabbi Sacks's favorites. And I mean, I know because we all went. He took us. He made sure that we knew the backstory. Lin-Manuel Miranda was a genius in his eyes. It was like it was incredible. But there is a line in there from one of the songs. Why do you write like you're running out of time? And I think the thing with Rabbi Sacks was he had, whether it was because of the cancer that he had in his 40s and it came again, or whether it was just something within him, he felt like from that point on, like the clock was ticking. And I think it was that combined with a number of other factors that we can talk about, but it was really that inner sense of, why do you write like you're running out of time? Like there is stuff that I've got in me that I need to get out, and I know that life is finite, and therefore, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to do that in the way that maximizes that productivity?
So that's actually
he hated.
Go ahead, Joanna.
He hated wasting time.
Yes.
He hated time wasting. For him was I've got to use every spare minute that God has given me to fulfill my destiny, my legacy.
All right, this is a perfect transition for what we're here to talk about. So basically, I'm going to start with you, Joanna. What did an average day or week look like for Rabbi Sacks? Can you just describe how he organized his time, from his study and writing to meetings and teaching? What was his approach to time management?
Before, I think it was before he became chief rabbi, he went to sit with one of the leading Christian religious leaders, and he said to him, how do you plan your time? You've clearly got it very carefully mapped out. How do you do it? And he said to him, it's very interesting, he said to him, the first thing you do is plot holidays. He said, you are going to work like the clappers. You have to build in holiday time. So you put that in, otherwise it won't happen. Then you build in reading and studying time, because again, if you don't have that guarded, protected time, you won't get it. Then you build in writing time. The writing time was the absolute core of everything around the way he operated. He used to, I remember a conversation that he had with Simon Sharma. And he said to him, Simon, how do you plan your time? How do you work? And Simon said to him, I get up in the morning, I do a certain amount of time, and then I carry on with my day. For Rabbi Sacks, he needed complete silence around him, like no disruptions, no disturbances. He needed protected time to write. He needed to completely immerse himself in what he was doing. So during that time, he carved out 6 weeks in the summer and approximately 4-5 weeks in the winter, and that was protected time. And unless the sky was falling in and World War III, God forbid, was happening, we did not disturb him. Dan and I would get on with lots of other things that we had to do, but that was his protected time, and that's how he became so incredibly prolific and productive. But then his average day, he carved out writing time and thinking time every day. And we had a system and a rhythm for his day, for his week. He didn't sleep very much, which was how he was able to be also incredibly productive. He read probably more than a book a day, and Dan and I were on the receiving end of some amazing books. And when you got a book from Rabbi Sacks, Dan will tell you, you didn't have to read the whole book because he'd marked up the pages that were worth reading. But he was incredibly productive, but he had lists of things that he wanted to achieve. So he had constantly, whether it was a daily list, a weekly list, a yearly list, he was exceptionally, he worked very hard on himself, and preparation for him was absolutely everything. So there was nothing left to chance.
Okay, so Joanna, you touched on so many things. I just want to break it down, because it's really a number 5, 6 very big points. First of all, let's start with the yearly cycle. You mentioned 6 weeks of deep thinking and writing in the summer and 4 weeks in the winter. Were there other elements along the year that were kind of structured to allow and to facilitate that level of productivity and work? Dan, maybe we go to you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those were sort of the moments where he would really write books, right? So, but you have to remember, this was someone who was writing a weekly Covenant and Conversation, which was his sort of commentary essay on the Hebrew Bible. Like, that was a 2,000-word essay every single week, that was of incredibly high quality. Going back to what Joanna said about the books, there was a book that he once recommended to me, which was Cal Newport's book called Deep Work. And in that book, it talks about different styles of working at different points in the year. So there's, I think, and I can't remember that there's 4 types of things, and it's escaped me now exactly what they are. One of them, I think, is monastic, right? The sense of, as Joanna said, there are moments in the year where you shut yourself off from all other distractions. But the book basically gives you a productivity guide for how to maximize every single element of your day. So, for example, there was never a car ride that we went on, a 40-minute car ride to an event in central London, where he didn't have something printed off in a folder that he was reading and editing in the car.
Incredible.
Right? And that was like light work. It wasn't the deep thinking of how am I going to write a book, but it was like, okay, what am I doing? And I remember those car journeys, because he would sort of get in the car. How you doing, Dan? Fine. Like, what's news? Anything I need to know? No, fine, thank you. And he'd put on his noise cancelling headphones, and then he would get out and he'd start scribbling. And it was like a yellow pad, like a yellow legal pad, and he would just start scribbling. And at first, when I first started working with him, frankly, I found it a bit strange, right? I wasn't used to this, and I was there thinking, oh, I've got to make conversation, and da-da. And the thing with Rabbi Sacks is you had to be very comfortable in silence, like in the knowledge that that was time well spent, right? And what that meant was that the scribbles that he was writing on his yellow legal pad, at first I thought they were about the event we were going to. And then I realized, like, after a few journeys, no, he prepped for that, like, last week. Like, this was about, what is the essay I need to write in 3 weeks' time? How am I sketching it out? What's the idea? What was in the news today that was particularly relevant? Like, he would always be with his iPad, scrolling through news. He would read all the op-eds to get a sense of the trends that were going on. So it really was, like, every single minute. It wasn't just the calendar at large. It was, like, minute by minute of the day, like, how can I best use the time to advance my writing?
All right, so basically we just in general what I'm picking from our conversation is he had 10 weeks 12 weeks a year allocated for deep study and writing, which is how he produced a book. Again, 1 book a year on average for more than 30 years. This is just absolutely incredible. Did he publish a book before his 40s? No. Wow.
He said that he was very, very worried. He said, if you don't write before you're past your 40, you're not going to be able to write. And he said, he was determined. Before he became chief rabbi, he had a little hut in the garden, and that's where he used to do his productive work, and we hear stories of him banging away at the typewriter with 2 fingers, but he was absolutely determined that by 40 he would write his first book.
But he didn't. All the books were written afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we got the yearly cycle, and then we have the weekly cycle. Obviously, there is the Jewish element of the weekly cycle with the Shabbat and so on. But can you say more about the weekly cycle? Because he was able to produce Covenant Conversation, which is the weekly commentary on the Torah. And I think he was able to produce about 5, 6, 8 full cycles of commentary on the Torah. Am I right?
More. Probably close to 15.
Yeah.
15 full cycles. So we know in Covenant Conversation.
So he had 5 topic-based series. But before that, and they really only started from 2014 onwards, that was with leadership. But previous to that, he was writing from probably 2005, 2006 onwards, something
So
like that.
we're talking about a weekly production of about 1,500 to a 2,000 word essay for 15 years straight, week after week. How does that happen?
So he would write 3 or 4 in a go, because he called them, he put them in the freezer. So he would set himself aside a few hours. His best time, as Dan was saying, there are certain seasons he found his most productive time was in the morning. And he liked the natural light. So for him, it was good to write early. So winter was difficult, but he would write solidly in the morning on certain days of the week. We had, during the Chief Rabbi's office time, he had very specific diary requirements. There were certain days that he was in the office, certain days that he was out at meetings or visiting communities or speaking engagements, but he would set aside that serious writing time. On top of that, so Covenant and Conversation was a regular, and I can't tell you how many times he said to us, guys, I can't carry on. And we said, sorry, you're not stopping. This is something people have connected. And everywhere he went in the world, people would stop him and say, I'm learning with you every week. You're at my Shabbat table. You're with my family. And when he heard that, it gave him huge chizuk. I'll never forget going to a community with him in Miami. And when we came into shul on Friday night, they were all laid out on the table. There were piles of this week, last week, next week's, 3 weeks ago. And afterwards, I said to the rabbi, that's so nice that you put them out. He looked at me as if I was mad. He said, are you joking? The community comes in, they expect it. It's not just for your benefit, not for Rabbi Sacks's benefit. These were people connecting with him on a regular basis. So he felt he had a commitment to his readers around the world. But he also had regular articles. He wrote once a month for the Credo column in the Times. And that was on a religious idea tied to something relevant. He did Thought for the Day, which was in the news program of the BBC. That was also about once a month, and it had to be the BBC. Not only vetted you, but you had to be on topic, so you could only write it really the day before, and edit it there and then, and deliver it the following morning. So he had a lot of commitments, writing commitments that were ongoing. You showed us, Gidi, the list of articles that he wrote year by year. I've never seen it set out like that. It was amazing to see, but that didn't include Covenant Conversation. But he was in constant demand for writing for his written pieces. And it could be Jewish community, but basically it was the national press.
So let's just zoom in on his daily schedule, because obviously he gets up, he does the morning prayer, he gets into the rhythm of the day. And then you mentioned the early morning time. Now, we all know that almost all great thinkers and writers and the most productive people in the world, what distinguishes them from other people is how they use their morning, meaning how disciplined they are, but this incredibly valuable time of the day. So can you guys say more about how Rabbi Sacks treated his mornings?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when he was writing books, especially towards the latter books, he would be very strict on the number of words that he wanted to try and hit. So he'd have a target, he'd track his progress, he'd track when he didn't hit his target and try and work out why. And it was just it was very regimented. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I was sitting at the desk with him whilst he was writing it. This was he used sort of researchers fairly sparingly. He would do a lot of it himself. The way that he set up his working environment was really important to him, and
let's get back to that in a moment, because that's a big thing.
Yeah. So that there is sort of quite a lot to say. But certainly I think it was a case of it's just that discipline of keep going and keep going. He would often say to me, writing's a bit like, Shachrit Mincha Mariv. It comes and you have to kind of do it whether you want to or not. It's like that. It's just that constant drumbeat of whether the writing is going well or it's not going well. You keep going. And that I think is something that, again, is not unique to him.
That's a big takeaway.
That's a big thing.
He was hugely disciplined about his life, about his writing, but about his life. Exercise every single day. He had certain habits. You see certain people have tools that they rely on. So fine liner had to be Stietler fine liner. And when they ran out in our local stationery store, we had to go elsewhere to find them. You couldn't deviate from that particular pen. The yellow pads that Dan said, there were things that helped him in his creativity.
So let's just go one by one. You mentioned daily exercise. What was it like? How long? How intense? Was this just to warm up, or was it intense?
He had a bicycle. He had a room with both in the chief rabbi, when he was in the chief rabbi, whilst he was chief rabbi in their residence, he had a dedicated room with his exercise machines. And he did the same when he moved after he stepped down as chief rabbi. He also loved walking out in the air, the fresh air. For him, there was nothing better. They lived when he left the chief rabbi's office. He backed onto Hampstead Heath, and for him there was nothing like walking outside in the fresh air with Elaine, and they would walk for hours. For them, that was the best thing. Even when he went on holidays, walking was everything. If you tried to walk with him, and you know how tall I am, walking with him was not a joke. It was like speed running. He literally, and he couldn't moderate his pace, so you just had to keep up.
And Dan,
but that was for him.
Yes. Dan, you spoke about his passion for music. Can you say about that? Like, what did he listen to? Was music part of his inspiration?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think he used music in a number of different ways. Like, there wasn't a genre that he wasn't really into. I mean, classic was probably the foundation of it. And he would use that to relax, to inspire, to kind of break up moments. So there was definitely a love of classical music. But then, like I said, it was he saw beauty in lots of different things and in lots of different forms. So like Hamilton the musical, he thought was terrific because it was this storytelling art form, which was akin to what music is, right? It's the melodies tell a story, they tell a emotion and everything. So there was that kind of music. There was occasionally there was, I mean, a lot of Israeli and Hebrew music. So he found like, the Ishai Rebos of this world that kind of they take ancient texts and set them to modern music, and you get audiences of religious and secular singing these songs. He found very profoundly moving. So there was that kind of music. Then there was sort of the random ones. He once got quite into Eminem, Lose Yourself, because he sort of found the lyrics of it, not necessarily Eminem himself, obviously, but the lyrics of like, this is the moment, like lose yourself in the moment, like that sense of like the time is now. And I think it kind of goes back to, there was like this common thread of like the music was about the here and now. Let's kind of keep going. So yeah, I think it was, and he was forever kind of, you get in a car and he'd whip out his iPad and sort of go onto YouTube and say, have you heard of this and have you done this? And I mean, he was a huge fan of the Beatles. He was a huge fan of Queen. He knew the backstory to every song, and he would regularly bring music into sort of some of his writings. Like, you read his Covenant and Conversation when it's the Shira, right? I think it's Beshalach, and it's all about like language. How when words want to transcend the finite world, it goes to music. It becomes song, right? So for him, song was deeply spiritual, deeply moving. There was like what one of the keynote kind of Jewish drashot that he gave every year was on the first night of Slichot, at midnight Slichot service. And that was a service that was done with something called the Shabbaton Choir, where one of the choristers was Chazan Lionel Rosenfeld, who was one of his oldest friends, I think even from university they were together. And the choir would sing, and you would kind of see him on the bimah with his, his fist clenched and his eyes closed, and because he got so into it, everyone in the community got he kind of carried everyone with him. But it was really important to him.
Well, he spoke
a lot. He
spoke a lot about.
It gave him that inner
also
strength.
About dancing.
Yeah.
And he said one of his famous drashot was that Jews are the only ones where the rabbis, the leaders of the community, dance with the law. He wrote about Simchat Torah.
Yeah.
Did he dance also?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
He
There's
was
some
a
fabulous
maker,
pictures.
sure.
Yeah, very much so.
Fantastic.
Yom
I think
Ha'atzmaut,
that was sort of part of the thing. I remember going to the Yom Ha'atzmaut Tekes here in London is often held by the Chaverim of Bnei Akiva, and it's a big thing, and there's dancing afterwards, and he would always go down and be in the middle, and all the Chaverim and everyone would be dancing, and he would be dancing, and I think that was part of what connected him with so many people, was that he radiated this joy of Judaism, and this sort of sense of he just had this deep love, and it was this love of people, but love of Hashem and love of Yiddishkeit that kind of came out of him in different ways, whether that was music, whether that was dance, whether it was through words or his ability to articulate kind of what you were thinking. He just had this unique way of making people connect.
I wanted to echo what Dan said. I think he had a simchat hachayim, so he looked for joy in so many different things, but particularly music spoke to him across the genres. But I was once walking out of the BBC radio studio with him one morning when he was doing Thought for the Day, and the producer walked out with us, and he'd have to be in there very early to do Thought for the Day. He was on air at 10 to 8, and she walked us out and she said, "Rabbi Sacks, I heard that you're a fan of rap music. Would you like to do a program with us?" So I was walking with her. I was like, "No." And she said, "I'm getting a bit of interference from your colleague here." I said, "I'm really sorry, but I don't think it's Rabbonish." And she looked at him like, "What on earth?" And he said, "It's just not appropriate for me to do so." But it was the way he was actually very proud to be asked, because that someone has heard that he loved rap music. And when we got back in the car, he said to me, "Joanna, have you heard Eminem's latest?" And as Dan said, he played it at full blast. But one of my earliest memories working with him, I used to, in the early days in the chief rabbi's office, I'd also fix his computers, whatever else was support we gave him. And I think I was under his desk fixing something, and my handbag was on the other side of the room. And normally my phone is on silent, but for some reason it wasn't. And I was absolutely mortified. It started ringing, and I'm a very big Queen fan, and it was Bohemian Rhapsody. And I don't know who was more shocked, him or me. And he looked at me, he said, "Joanna, you like Queen?" And I said, "Chief Rabbi, you know that's Queen?" And then I proceeded to get a share about exactly how Bohemian Rhapsody was made and how it was dubbed 70 times to create that sound. And I was like, he just had a thirst for knowledge on so many different levels. But because he loved music, he wanted to know absolutely everything that he could about it. But also in shul, in communities, he felt that music brought a community together. And you talk about dancing. I mean, he was the heart and soul on the bimmer. I had the most amazing Yom Kippur one year in Marble Arch with Lionel Rosenfeld and Rabbi Sacks. And I said to my daughter Rivka one year, I said, "Please, will you come with me and spend Yom Kippur in Marble Arch?" And it's nowhere near where I live, so we had to eat at home and stay in a local hotel. I just wanted to experience, because I'd heard how Yom Kippur was absolutely extraordinary with Rabbi Sacks leading the services, and it was beyond. And Neila, at the close of Yom Kippur, he had the kids up on the bimah with the choir, and the whole community was involved. And that for him was absolutely the core of community. So those are my just incredible memories.
There was that one of the very first BBC interviews that he did was for a program called Desert Island Discs, which is a very famous program on the BBC where you have to select sort of 8 pieces of music that you would, and then it tells us his life. So if any of your listeners are looking for a recommendation, Google Desert Island Discs Rabbi Sacks, and you'll hear him talk about his life and his love of music.
Incredible. So, but can you just say about his sources of inspiration? We're talking about one of the most creative and productive and also inspiring individuals of recent decades. But who and what inspired him? Who did he look up to? Where did he kind of source his ideas from?
So, I mean, we used to joke with him that he kept Amazon in business. Like, there were daily deliveries of books, and these books would range from things that you would expect to receive that he would read to things that you didn't really understand why they were arriving at his door, right? But I think part of where his passion for reading was because of his thirst for ideas, right? So he was inspired by other people's ideas and other people's modes of thought. I mean, I remember when we went to the TED conference when he was giving his TED talk in 2017, and like in most of these things, you would go, you would do the talk, and then you would leave, and he said, no, for this one we're staying. And it wasn't just that we stayed for the conference; we did not miss a session. We were the first people in our seats in every single TED session. Like, he spoke in the opening session, and then there were like 9 or 10 other sessions. And we sat and we listened to everyone else speaking, and he'd stop people in the corridor and go, "You did a really interesting thing. Like, can I just ask you about that? So it was this constant inquisitive mind. So there was like the reading and the books, and then there was like just tapping into the zeitgeist of the moment. So he would read op-eds like the whole time, and op-eds that he agreed with, op-eds that he disagreed with, from papers that he read, from papers that he didn't read. It was that sense of like, where are those touch moments? What are those key themes and trends within wider society that I should have a view on? And I think that's how he was inspired. It was by seeing what other people were doing, by reading, by kind of connecting.
But I also think it was also by having lots and lots of conversations with people. He loved hearing what other people had to say, and when he had young rabbis, young educators come and speak to him, he would ask them, "What are you reading? Why? Have you enjoyed it? Can you tell me more about it? If you didn't enjoy it, why not?" And he was inspired by the conversations. I mean, why do we call his weekly Parshat HaShavua covenantal conversation? Because it was Torah as conversation. So we're learning from God, we're conversing, we're passing it on to the next generation. He loved speaking to young people. This is where this is one of our focuses of the Rabbi Sacks legacy, because he was inspired by the next generation, and he felt, if we have young, knowledgeable, proud Jews, we will have a strong community. But he loved listening to their questioning minds and the conversations that he had with them. But he had conversations with people, as Dan said, across the board, and he was inspired to think, and he wanted to expand his mind. He lived to learn. He was a lifelong learner.
So basically, the first time I met Rabbi Sacks, I came to London with a team to try to research the whole phenomenon of the delegitimization of Israel and the BDS movement. And that was probably in 2009. And then somehow I get invited to meet him. And honestly, by the conversation that we had, by the questions that he asked, it was so informative for our thinking about what we were working on. In many ways, there was this dynamics where he was asking us, but we were learning from his questions, because his questions actually gave us the directives for the research. I want to kind of move on, and I assume that happened with many other people. I also want to mention another event where I think about a year or two later, he actually, through you, reached out to me and asked to organize for him a meeting in Israel with young, non-Orthodox Israelis. And we did that, if you remember, in Tel Aviv. Yes, and it was an incredible conversation between the chief rabbi of England, an Orthodox Jewish person, and these Tel Aviv people that came to see him. And initially I had a concern that maybe we were not going to be able to bring people. I mean, how many people from Tel Aviv would love to meet the chief rabbi of England? But it turns out that it was sold out. People were hanging, from the lamps, whatever. I do want to ask you, though, he repeatedly mentions two people, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and Rabbi Soloveitchik. Were these kind of the two main inspirations for his life, or were there others as prominent in terms of where he came from?
There were others. He talks about them because that was the formative journey that he took to America in 1968. So he was finding himself, finding his feet in his Judaism and trying to come to terms with what he understood. It was following the 1967, the Six-Day War, when there was a resurgence of Jewish community worldwide, and people suddenly realized that they had a connection to Jews in Israel who had nothing to do with them, and actually, that we are one big Jewish family. And that's made him start his Jewish journey. And so he sought out the Rebbe, which when he went to 770, they told him he was ridiculous to think that he could just turn up on the doorstep and come and visit. But he did actually see him because he'd started connecting with Lubavitch in Cambridge, who that opened the way for and the doors for him. Rav Soloveitchik was one of those that he met on his journey. Rabbi Lamb was another one. But then he also had some very important people that he connected with, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and Gush, and also Rav Nachum Rabinovich, who he called his rabbi.
Wow.
So there were lots of people. He didn't just, but he talks about the Rebbe and Rav Soloveitchik because those were people that he actually sought out. But Rav Nachum was someone that actually trained him to think in a halachic way and explore his understanding of his Judaism, and I think Rav Nachum also pushed him to really learn deeply and understand. Dan, I think he sometimes felt that some on the right of the community didn't understand the depth of his knowledge and were shocked by how learned and he was. But this is because Rav Nachum really, really pushed him to work hard and explore. For about 7 years, he was in deep learning state.
So basically,
and one sorry, just to add to that, like one of them, when he stepped down from office, there were a number of sort of tributes that came in. I think probably the one that made him the most emotional was from Rav Nachum, who sent a video message that essentially said, "You've transcended all titles. Like in your generation, you no longer need to be chief rabbi because you're Rabbi Sacks." And I think for him to hear that from Rav Nachum was the highest form of praise that anyone anywhere could give him.
So, and I think that what's so special about Rabbi Sacks is the way he brings together Jewish knowledge with non-Jewish knowledge, and this is where this is where he connects with a lot of people who are trying to merge worlds that are seemingly unconnected, the Jewish wisdom and the non-Jewish wisdom. And I think someone said to me that Rabbi Sacks had the equivalent of 5 or 7 PhDs in terms of his education. I don't know if that's true or not, but basically we're talking about a person who was incredibly well educated in secular terms. he also won the Templeton Prize, right? Which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for philosophy. So can you say a little bit about how that came about, meaning that merger of Jewish knowledge, which you spoke about, and non-Jewish knowledge that he was so outstanding for?
I think it goes back to, as Dan was discussing before, his deep wish to learn. He was a lifelong learner. So, but what he felt was that, and it was a phrase that he coined, was a Judaism engaged with the world. So he felt that he could bring secular knowledge, philosophy, science, medicine,
Sociology, leadership,
literature,
psychology,
sociology,
anthropology, everything.
everything. And he could pull all of that out from Jewish texts. So he was showing how Jewish texts were relevant to us in the here and now. His book, The Great Partnership, about religion and science, it was to show young people that you didn't need to have either or, you could have both. And what he did was he made very complex and difficult ideas accessible through his merging of Torah v'chokhmah, as he called it, Torah wisdom and the Western wisdom.
Dan, you once told me. I remember when he finished his tenure as chief rabbi and he had to vacate the apartment. There were 30,000 books that had to be sorted through, and that he knew each and every one of these books. He knew their title and he knew their content. So, is that an exaggeration?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think there was sort of between somewhere 20, 25, 30,000. Like, no one knows. All I know is I remember on moving day, the removal people were bringing out boxes and they were just marked up books, to the extent that even they were saying, are there any clothes in this house? Like, literally. I remember when we helped him and Lady Sacks sort of move into their new home. They had spent time. He had spent time, or had a builder build bookshelves in basically every room in the house, every single room, and he had kind of measured the shelves because he knew the height of certain books that he needed, and he got very cross when the builder had done one of them wrong, that we only realized like when we moved in. But it was that kind of constant thing, and then like when we were unpacking it, we sort of were segmenting up the books into different topic areas, and there were certain topic areas that he wanted up in the study because he was working on those particular things, and that kind of came back to the productivity. He didn't want to have to walk down the stairs to find the book in one of the front rooms in order to. He just wanted it there. He wanted to know where everything was. And there were moments where, as his writing focus changed, I basically would spend a couple of days in the house lugging boxes of books around the place to try and get what he needed up in the study and what he didn't know, or what he no longer needed, back in the front room. So yeah, but I think to go back to your point about kind of Judaism and secular knowledge, he was basically a translator, right? So to Jews, he would take Western thought and philosophy and show them how that was relevant to their lives and to their faith, and how the latest scientific discovery wasn't a reason to believe in God less, it was a reason to believe in God more, right? And then he would take things that were going out there in the world, AI, right, or compute, like technology, and he would be like, yeah, you guys are grappling with this thing, but let me show you what the Jubilee year was in the time of Tanakh, and why that means that you need to have a digital detox. Like, it's so he fused these two worlds together. And look, you have to remember, there are lots of people. He wasn't unique in doing this, right? But what his great strength is that not only did he have the brains, he had the ability to articulate thought, he had the ability to write, to speak, to inspire, and lots of people are very good at some of those things, but very few people are good at all of those things at equal strength. And he was one of those people who just had a plethora of skills that allowed him to translate those worlds to one another.
I think one story I wanted to share with you, which sort of highlights this. We were in Israel at one point, and a group of Haredi gentlemen asked to meet with him, and he said to me, he said, Joanna, why do they want to speak to me? I don't understand. What's the relevance? It turns out they were working for Mobileye, helping them with moral dilemmas because they were deeply studying Gemara, Mishnah, and they were grappling with these very difficult moral dilemmas every day. And he was in seventh heaven. He couldn't get over it. And he said, look what we're bringing to wider society. Nobody knows when they're driving a car with Mobileye that these are the Haredim that are deeply immersed in the yeshiva world are helping them sort out, who do I avoid? Is it the one in the buggy, or is it the lady crossing the road? It's the trolley effect. He was just blown away, and these things gave him such joy, and he was reaching out for these things that would lift him. It was an amazing thing to see.
So basically, I just want to ask you now about two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is that Rabbi Sacks, in spite of everything he did, in spite of all of his responsibilities, his writing commitments, the books, the articles, he was also very accessible. Myself, every once in a while I had a request. He was always there, responding quite quickly. So how were you, as his team, able to combine these very big commitments that are time-consuming and being available and open for requests from the public, for a blessing, for a thought, for something that, that the kind of things that people reach out to a rabbi for?
So we carved out time in the diary. On a Friday morning, he was always available. The rabbis knew that they could call and arrange a time to speak to him. But he made a real point of touching people at times when they needed some words of chizuk or some guidance. And one of the things that he relied on us for was to guard his time. So he could go in and he could spend time, whether it was with you or it was one of the students that came to seek his advice, and not worry. He didn't need to look at his watch and worry. He knew that we would come in and knock on the door and let him know that that time was up and his next meeting, but he could be utterly focused on the issue at hand, and he didn't need to worry. The same with his emails. We guarded him from those kind of things because they were a distraction. It took up his time that he didn't need, but he empowered us to bring him people and issues where he could guide and help, and bring his own thoughts to bear that would help someone on their journey. And the amount of times that I've been stopped over the last 5 years, people who said, "You've no idea, he changed my life. It was a phone call, it was an email, it was a stop in the street, or he popped in to see my mother in hospital." He didn't need to do that, but people don't realize how much that short interaction with him changed. He didn't realize for himself how much he changed their lives.
I can tell you just one little story from me. When my daughter Noah was 12, as you may remember, she wrote a drasha where she quoted extensively Rabbi Sacks, and she added this interpretation to something that he wrote in one of his commentary on, I think it was on Chayei Sarah. And Rabbi Sacks says, this interpretation is actually new. That added commentary, is actually new. And next time that I publish the book, I'm going to credit Noah for this.
Wow.
Sadly, tragically, it didn't happen. But this is Rabbi Sacks. This is Rabbi Sacks willing to give credit to a 12-year-old girl who's writing a drasha.
And she'll never forget it.
And that's incredible. And one of the most valuable books that we have is the book that is the Tanakh that he inscribed for her for that bat mitzvah. And she has it with her today. When she went to Israel, it's with her all the time. Wow. I do want to ask you on the other end of the spectrum, and that is, Rabbi Sacks spent time with the most prominent people in the world, with the Prime Minister of England, the King of England, the Pope, etc. So my two questions are, how did he prepare for these meetings? What was his mindset going into these meetings? And important, how did he preserve his modesty when he was able to travel in such high echelons of society?
Well, I think it boils down to sort of any good preparation, which is about information. Like he wanted to know everything about every aspect of every event that he did. So for us, that was a lot of what our job was. Our job was liaising with the organizations, whether it was the Vatican or a shul in the Upper West Side, right? You know, it didn't really matter. Like the time that we sort of put into the preparing and the notes and the thinking through and the research and everything that you do as a chief of staff for a principal, like that's what we were doing. Like, look, granted, there were, you know, different levels, right? So you're going and spending or a Shabbat somewhere, that's a certain level of briefing note. You're going to visit the Pope to have a conversation about something, that's a higher level of briefing note, right? But in essence, it was overwhelming information that he would then absorb, and then a lot of it was done through conversation. So we would get the information, and then we would go and sit with him, and he would say, "Okay, guys, what are we going to get? What do we want to try and get out of this meeting? Like, what is the thing that we can bring to this that is going to be different?" And we would talk, and we would talk it through. And so, yes, there was a certain amount of formal briefing, but a lot of it was him talking to us, but also to experts in that area. Like we are not the beholders of all knowledge. At least I'm not. Joanna is amazing, right? But you know that sense of, okay, there are other people that we need to consult from outside of the bubble because we lived in a bubble. And who do we bring into this conversation? And to go back to Joanna's point, like ultimately it boiled down to trust. Like he trusted us implicitly to not just protect his time, but when he had something really major, to go and get the information from the right people, either through us that we could deliver to him or directly to him, that allowed him to operate in those environments.
That's incredible. Joanna.
For him, the audience was absolutely imperative to know who he was speaking to, and to as he used to tell us, you know, I want to give them a message that they can hear. There's no point in me giving them a message that is going to be meaningless to them. I want them to come away with something. I want to give them hope. I want to give them chizuk. I want to reach them where they need me. It was very important
so
to him.
basically, and can you just say, how does he stay modest and grounded when he travels in these circles? How does it work?
So he used to tell us, he said, compliments are fine, just don't inhale.
I think there were that was a genuine mindset of his, right? Like humility. You know, Moshe is described in Tanakh as Evet Hashem, like the humble. Like that was one of Moshe's characteristics. It was definitely one of Rabbi Sacks's characteristics. I'll give you a couple of examples. So one was during COVID. As soon as lockdown came, I said to him, you know, people are looking for like they need stuff, right? And he's like,
Pesach.
Yeah, but even before Pesach, it was sort of during the lockdown, and I said to him, look, I think we should do a Facebook Live, you know, weekly going into Shabbat. Here's a thought that you can relate to COVID, that can relate. And he's like, Dan, people don't need to hear from me. They've got their Rabbonim doing it. They've got their local people. Everyone's got someone. I'm like, no. I don't think you quite understand. Like, let me try and explain this to you. You are Rabbi Sacks. Right? People at this moment want to hear from you. And it took us a bit of time to convince him to do this, because he was like, they don't. Like he didn't, and even right up until, you know, the end, and like, you know, when he was ill, there were letters coming in from all over the place, like from, you know, regular people on the street to prime ministers, presidents, and you know who, right? So, and they were all kind of saying, you inspired me, you inspired the way I think, the way I act, the way I am. And I think like part of the reason why he inspired other people was he never got carried away with his own
Mhm.
sense of status. He remained grounded, and that was like part of our job as well, right? Every speaking engagement, the only thing he wanted to hear was the
The
constructive
Deep
feedback. If
feedback.
someone came up to him and said, Rabbi Sacks, that was the best
That
drasha
was
I've ever heard in my life, he'd be like, great, thanks. How can I improve? Right? Like and so for us, and we always used to split in a lot of events whereby Joanna would kind of do the formal thing at the front and be, you know, the right hand person and be there. And I would go and plonk myself at the back of a room or right in the middle of a crowd so that as soon as it was finished, I could kind of hear what people were saying. Right. And my job was then like report back and say, like, some people like that argument. The bit that they didn't like was this. Right. And so everything was about what are the mechanisms and who are the people around. I mean, Joanna, I'm sure you want to come in. Let me just share one quick story that kind of demonstrates this, which was my very first week on the job, where we were working on an article. It might have been one of the Times articles or a Thought for the Day broadcast. I can't remember what it was. He used to work in his office at home, and I would be in the office in the chief rabbi's office. And he emailed through the article, and it popped up on the screen, and I opened it, the draft of this article, and I read it, and it was beautiful and as you would expect. And I sent him back an email that was, thanks so much, Rabbi Sacks. It reads terrific. Shall I send it in? And I pressed send, and within 10 seconds, my phone went, and it was a withheld number, so I knew it was him. And I picked up the phone, and it was, hi, Rabbi Sacks, how you doing? Dan, yeah. He's like, there's a million people in the world that I could send that article to who would give me the response that you just did. He's like, that's not your job. And then he said 6 words that completely framed my relationship with him. He said, you are empowered to say no.
Beautiful.
Right? And so he said, don't worry, I know what I need to do. And 10 minutes later, a much better version of the article came in and we sent it off. The next week, we were doing the same. We were working on another thing. He sends it again. And this time I'm like, I'm not making the same mistake twice. I rip it to shreds. Absolutely, like, you lost your argument, the second half is weak, etc. I kind of hesitate a little bit and I press send again. 10 seconds later, the phone goes again. And it's him, and I'm like, I can see how this is going to go. You know, Dan, this has been a great partnership, but I think the time has come, and maybe you should start looking elsewhere.
Spend time with
I
the
pick up the phone
grandkids.
somewhat Yeah, exactly. So I pick up the phone quite hesitantly and was like, hello, and there's this voice on the other line, and it's like, better, right? And there was this sense of excitement about being challenged.
yeah.
And I think that was what kept him humble. It was, he didn't look for praise, although there was plenty coming his way. He looked for areas of improvement. And the people that could offer him ways to improve were the people whose relationships he really valued.
Joanna, before you give us
Yeah.
your take on this, I do want to ask you something else. And that is my dear friend and mentor and teacher, Avram Infeld, who, by the way, we did an episode with him on Jewish People just early, and he was the one who introduced me to Rabbi Sacks. But I do want to say that Avram Infeld is credited for the following sentence. When Rabbi Sacks retired from the position of chief rabbi of British Jewry, British Jews lost a chief rabbi and world Jews won a chief rabbi.
I remember him
Yes.
saying that.
So my question to you is, was Rabbi Sacks aware, were you aware as his team, that this is the transition that was actually happening and that he was letting go of a space that you could say smaller, Britain, for a much bigger space, which is the entire English-speaking world?
So in his own humble way, he was aware, but he was shocked. And I remember being with him, I think it was in Mexico, which was a challenge on its own because we'd I didn't even tell him until we were in the airport on our way to Mexico. But there was a Haredi guy who was literally causing a lot of trouble about his visit, and I had endless conversations with the team in Mexico that were bringing him over, young guys who were determined they weren't going to let this terrorist win, and that was their phraseology. And I told Rabbi Sacks in the airport, and he said, "And did you seek advice and guidance?" I said, "Everybody said you can't give in, you have to go." He had sold out audiences on every single event that he spoke at. And afterwards he walked out and he said, why are people coming to hear me? And he was honestly like bemused at this enormous gathering, like thousands and thousands of people, despite this noisy nonsense in the background. They came out, and I said to him one even Friday night, I remember him speaking in a shul, and we walked out together, and he said to me, he said, "How did that go?" And he really wanted to know, what was the feedback. And I said to him, I said, "Rabbi Sacks, I must tell you, they understood your jokes. Tomorrow, we're not going to have simultaneous translation." And he said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because if you listen to the laughter when you tell a joke." He said, "Did I tell a joke?" I said, "You always tell a joke, and you know when the instant laughter, and they don't have to wait for the simultaneous translation. You know that they've got the joke and they're listening to you in English." I said, "Tomorrow, do away with the simultaneous translation. You don't need it. You don't need the translator." And but people were just waiting on every word of what he said, and he was always amazed, always amazed. But one very quick story. So about the deep preparation that he did on absolutely everything, and it didn't matter whether it was his TED talk, which I'm going to mention, or whether it was a shul visit or a 3-person meeting in his study. That deep preparation was in absolutely everything he did. And I remember Dan was with him at TED, but I went with him to his rehearsal. And we went to the rehearsal, and they recommended on the plane. He was asking me what was I watching, so I said to him, "Oh, TED have sent instructions on how you stand and how when you speak." And he said, "Can I see it?" So I said, "Absolutely not." So he said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you're a natural, and I don't want to cramp your style. You don't need TED to tell you how to stand, how to talk, where to put your hands." But when we got there, they suggested that he listens to someone else before, so sitting on somebody else's rehearsal to get a sense of what's going to happen. It was Ray Dalio, and Ray Dalio gave quite a stilted presentation, I have to say. I'm sure that he was brilliant when he actually did TED itself, but he spoke for about 25 minutes. You only get 18 minutes maximum. And the feedback was probably half an hour's worth of feedback on his speech. So he had a lot of work to do. Rabbi Sacks got up, and I was really nervous, even though I knew he was pitch perfect and was amazing. And he kept it to 12 minutes. He said, "I don't need to use the full 18 minutes." And his message was just totally on message. He walked off, and Chris Anderson said to him, "Rabbi Sacks, don't change a word. That was absolutely perfect. But any chance you might lose the tie?" And I was standing behind him, and we'd read the recommendations, and he'd seen the dress code, and he said, "Chris, I promise you I will stick to the rest of the dress code. No dangling earrings, but the tie stays." And Chris just fell about laughing, but he put his heart and soul into preparing. But this is who I am, and TED like you to be relaxed. He said, "This is me relaxed, so if you don't mind, the yellow tie stays."
There's
I
there's two other things I would add to that. Like one is there's a saying in Judaism: greatness can be found in humility, right? And that's not just Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what Rabbi Sacks would say about the
Yeah.
royal family. Like their greatness is because they kind of are humble, and that very much was a reflection on him. He never realized it, but lots of the teachings that he put out there into the world about how you live your life and how were things that came from deep within him, right? And subconsciously almost. The other thing is, so he also had this thing about the difference between power and influence, right? And one is a zero-sum game. Power, if I have it, you don't, right? And the other one is a non-zero sum game. Like if I have influence, I can share that, like I can share love and I can share other things. And I think as a rabbi, there are lots of in like even today there are lots of rabbis that seek power, whether that's in Israel, in Israeli politics, in other ones, and he never did that. He never sought to have the power of the position that he held. He only ever sought to spread influence.
Rabbi Sacks, for sure, was the epitome of influence, especially after he left his chief rabbinate position. Beyond that point, it was 100% sheer, pure influence. And what an influence it was. I do want to say, just, you may remember that when he was in New York, December 2019, he was there for a week, and my wife and I had the honor through you, thanks to you, to actually host him. So it was the tail end of his visit. It's Christmas. A lot of people are out of town. I think our living room could host 60 to 80 people. So usually you invite more people than you can host, because especially last minute, because a lot of people are out of town. In this case, people traveled back in a very Israeli way. Everybody RSVP'd for 2 and came with 5. So if you remember, the audience was packed, not just the living room, the entire kitchen, all spilling all over to the corridor and the elevator. And it just was an incredible event. And Rabbi Sacks was at its best, without notes, etc., etc. It was really an unforgettable event. And sadly, that was his last trip to the United States.
Yeah.
Really sadly and tragically. And then just a few months later, he was ill. I remember being in touch with you and actually getting a sense that he was going to get better. And then
we were sure.
And then it just turned south. So I know it's a very private moment and a very intimate moment at the end of his journey. But what was the last moment that you feel comfortable sharing about his journey? A moment when, I don't know if there was even such a moment, when he knew that was, it wasn't looking good. And still he was present with you enough to radiate or share something that will carry forward. Was there a moment like that, and that you are comfortable sharing?
I mean, I can share if you want.
Yeah, you and then I'll add some.
So there was a moment a couple of weeks before he passed away where for Rabbi Sacks, Friday afternoon was always a time for, like, his work week was done. He'd written his drasha for Shabbat, and things were beginning to wind down. I have 4 kids, right? Friday afternoon, when you're trying to finish up work, albeit it was work for him, but you're trying to finish up work, you're trying to bath and shower kids, and you've got one hand doing it's chaos, right? We all know what those last few minutes are before Shabbat. And it was 2 weeks beforehand, and for some reason, everything was a bit calmer in my house, and my phone went, and it was him, and I hadn't seen him for a while because whatever, and I picked up the phone and I was like, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" And he was like, "I'm doing okay. How are you?" Like that was the first thing. I think within that question there was a sense of, I realized that this is not easy for you. How are you doing? Right? And I said to him, it's fine, and there's stuff's going on, and we're sort of working away. And this was still in the point where we anticipated that this was going to be a period of time out and he was going to get better. People always think that for us, we must have known, and we
didn't.
We, up until the very, very end, we thought that things were going to get better and he would be out for a period of time, but then back. Right? We weren't planning it, how it turned out, obviously. And so I said to him, look, have you seen, there's been quite a number of letters that have come in your way, right? And we're talking, like I said, kings, queens, prime ministers, presidents, you name it. And I was like, have you, we were sending them through Lady Elaine and And he was like, yeah, look, they're fine. I've read a couple like of the more personal ones that mattered to him. He's like, but it's fine. Like put them in a drawer. They're not for me. They're for you guys. I don't need them. They're not for me. And then I remember and then he was like, listen, Shabbat Shalom, Dan. And I went, Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Sacks. And that was the last time I spoke to him. That was the last conversation that we had. Was him phoning to wish me good Shabbos.
Wow.
And I think I got the call after you did.
Yeah.
Exactly the same. He let me read something out to him. But it was also, last week I found an email, the last email that I sent him that was about 10 days before. And we really made an effort to be chatty and upbeat. And I know this is difficult time for you, but I hope you're listening to your music. I hope you're, have you watched, we used to have conversations, when we got off the plane, what have you watched recently? And we've had this conversation. I remember walking through New York with him, after a plane journey, and him saying, what did you watch on the plane? I told him, I said, I really didn't like it. I think it was The Marriage Story or something. And he said to me, you didn't like it either? And I was like, oh, thank God he's watched it and he didn't like it either. I said, it's the first time I switched off. But actually, over Shabbat, I was reading a book called America's First Daughter, and I absolutely ached to pick up the phone to him and say, this is Hamilton. I'm reading it from a different aspect, and it was, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, to the amount of times, and I know I'm not alone in this, right? The amount of times since the 7th of October 2023 that I have pined to ask him, what do you think? What do you make of this? What should we be doing? How should we be responding? What does this mean about the future of the Jewish community in America, in Britain, in Israel? Like that, the things I miss, and there are many, many things, and there are many things that people who kind of only connected with him publicly miss, are the books and the wisdom and the writing.
Yeah.
The things I miss are the chats in the back of the car.
Yeah.
The kind of watching the random episode of The West Wing on the way back, because that's just what we did. Like the kind of little moments where he would ask about my kids, like the time when I would wind him up because Arsenal Football Club had once again bottled it in some football competition. Like, for us, there was like, yes, we worked for him, but it was never a job, right? It was a job. It was a life, right? I remember one time he called me up and he was like, Dan, are you in the office? I was like, no, Chief Rabbi, it's Bank Holiday Monday, which is like, Labor Day weekend. You're not in the office. He's like, oh, okay. Anyway, and then that was Monday. But it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. Now I'm in a job where if someone called me on Bank Holiday Monday, I ain't picking up the phone, right? I hope my boss isn't watching this, but I'm not picking up the phone. And but with him, it just wasn't that. It was we were all in. We were 200% of our time, of our life, of our love was for him, to the extent that during the shiva, and like that was obviously a very for us. I mean, for his family, it was a terrible, obviously, because they were mourning a father, a grandfather, a husband, and yet there was this public kind of sense to it all. And it very
with only 15 people, because it was
COVID,
it was
and like
crazy.
His Levaya had 30 people. Rabbi Sacks' Levaya had 30 people.
He would have had 30,000.
There would have been 30,000 people. Like,
there would have been when he passed away in New York. We did online Zoom calls with hundreds of people. That spoke about what he meant for them. This is happening in New York, I'm sure it happened in other places around the world in many different ways.
He was part of our family.
Right, and the thing that I was saying, and this is where his family are incredible. Like, they have taken on every value of everything. Like, they have treated us like family. Like, they knew what we gave to him during his life, and the way they have enveloped us throughout the whole process. Like, I remember his son, when they were sitting shiva, sort of said to me one day, he's like, I realized something the other day. He's like, in the last 10 years, you spent more time and spoke to my dad more than I did.
Yeah.
And, like, frankly, that was probably true.
Of course.
Right. And yet, and so, like, there was a real sense of you were working for someone who you didn't just look up to and admire, and, like, I loved him like a father. Like, it was that there was, like, this deep sense of affinity to everything that he did, and and the way that he treated us, and the opportunities that he gave us, and
He
the
did.
experiences that we had, that you just don't replicate that in a career.
I'll never forget coming back from a wedding with him after he stepped down as chief rabbi, and he said to me in the back of the car, and we always had these amazing conversations after an event when he'd put away his pad of paper, and that's when you could really have a chat with him, and he'd ask after the kids and what everyone was doing, and we came out of this wedding, and he said to me, Joanna, I don't need to do weddings anymore. I'm not the chief rabbi. This is the last one I'm going to do. And I looked at him horrified, and he looked at me and said, don't worry, that's not for you. Obviously I'm going to be there and do your children. Obviously, he was so upset that he'd upset me in any way. And he officiated at my daughter Rashi's wedding, but we didn't have the pleasure of him. And it was stunning having him part. He was with us in Sukkot, in our sukkah, when he moved closer, when he left St. John's Wood, where he lived as chief rabbi, and moved to Golders Green. He was a 20-minute walk away. And I remember calling Elaine that first year and saying tentatively, can I invite you for a Sukkot meal? And she said, we'd love to. And I was like, okay, now what do we do? And the kids, he was just fantastic. It was very special. He'd call up my son and say, my son is Chazan and a cantor, and he'd call him up and he'd say, Zach, I've got to daven, not my usual Pesukei de Zimra. I've got to do this. Can you talk me through it? And my kids loved it, loved that he was comfortable. He called my daughter. I remember telling Elaine that Rashi had got her third prize that year in university. And he called me afterwards. He said, Joanna, you told Elaine and you didn't tell me. Get her on the phone right now. But he had a sense of pride in my children's achievements just as much as his own children. And it was really, really special to be part of that, of his life in that way. And it's I hope what we're doing, we're doing him proud. That's what drives me day in, day out.
So first of all, I just want to thank you, because I think their insights about him are so important. Obviously, he has a tremendous substantive legacy through his books and his writings and his everything, all his intellectual creations that are documented in variety of forms, that you guys are in the Rabbi Sacks legacy are doing just incredible work in sharing with the world. But I think that there is also another aspect to the story which we try to highlight today. And that is, here's a person who had a mission, and he had a vision of himself and a mission to share his unique gift with humanity. And his unique gift was the intersection between his personality and his intellect. And his intellect is really exceptional on a generational, perhaps even centennial scale. And he was able to do that. And it's just absolutely mind-boggling that he was able to produce so much in such a relatively short period of time. So I just think that that aspect of his life is another big story, as I've been telling you over and over again. It's another big story, maybe not as big as the content and the substance, but as big. But a big part of the story of Rabbi Sacks is his incredible productivity. Dana, you just want to say something?
And I've just got one more thing.
Go on, Joanna.
Go.
Oh, one of my favorite teachings of Rabbi Sacks which speaks exactly to this point, is at the end of his life, Moshe was described as the description in Devarim. I can't remember exactly where in Devarim, but it's his energy was unbaited and his eyes were undimmed, right? And Rabbi Sacks' commentary on that is like, look, when you first read it, it seems like they're two separate phrases, but actually they're intrinsically connected. Why was his energy unabated? Because his eyes were undimmed, because he had a clear sense of where he was going. He knew what he was trying to do. Before he became chief rabbi, he took a page in his then Filofax, because electronic devices were not a thing back then, right? And on the first page of his Filofax, he wrote goals. And if you read those goals, they are, to raise the level of Judaism within wider society, to deepen the love of Judaism within Jews, right? All of those goals were as relevant on the last day of his life as they were on the first day of his time as chief rabbi. And it's because his eyes remained undimmed that his energy, even in the weeks before, right up, like I remember we were launching Morality online on Zoom calls in September 2020 and October 2020. And he would do the calls and people were giving me the most outstanding feedback. And that was 6 weeks before he passed away. His eyes were, his energy was unabated because his eyes were undimmed.
Incredible. Wow.
Just to one thing which we haven't mentioned, and we've alluded to his midot, but one of the things that he felt that he had an absolute responsibility to do, which is why he wore a yellow tie, was to give hope. So for him, the yellow tie was sunshine, to make people smile. He always tried to end on a high note so that people would walk away with their heads held high and feel stronger. And I think that's what we are so very much missing today. We need that chizuk, we need hatikva, we need that hope. And that's something that he gave us all when he was with us. And I, yeah.
And a voice of morality.
I'll tell you something, Gidi.
And a voice of morality.
And a voice of morality,
that gives us a lens and a prism to understand, through which to understand the world and to make decisions. Gidi. And that's so Gidi, missing right now. Please, Dan.
Gidi, that yellow tie. So there was one yellow tie that he wore on big occasions. So Ted Templeton, this speech on anti-Semitism in the European Park, you name it, it's the yellow tie. And I remember when he passed away, I called Joanna actually, and I was like, I need a yellow tie. I don't have a yellow tie for the Levaya. Like, is there any way that you could ask Elaine if I could borrow a yellow tie? And Elaine very kindly gave me 2 yellow ties. The tie that he was wearing when he went into hospital, and the yellow tie. And I wore the yellow tie at the Levaya, and I still have it, but I only wear it 2 days a year now. On first and second day Rosh Hashanah, when I blow shofar in shul. And shofar for me is a very nerve-wracking moment. It's the most nervous I am doing anything in shul at any point in the year. And before I blow, I like touch the tie. I like have it here. And for me, like, shofar is a clarion call, right? It's a call from us to God saying, help us. And it's also God calling to us down on earth and saying, wake up. And for me, it's like there's a connection there. There's like a call of me going up to him going, what do you think? How are we doing? What's my life looking like? Where shall I be going? What shall I be doing? And there's the voice that comes down that we all hear in our heads, right? Of him, either through the words on the book, the videos on the website, the podcast or whatever. But it's just calming, and it's that, and we do miss it. But what we are blessed with is an enormous canon of work that remains timely, right? You can pick up pretty much any of his covenant and conversations and read And they are as relevant today as they were when he wrote them 10, 15 years ago. You can pick up Morality, his last book, that was published in 2020, and it could have been published last week, right? So there's a whole canon of work. And yes, we missed the voice on the really timely things, but on the morality, his voice is very much still alive.
And I do want to say that you mentioned these essays, or you referred to Yom Kippur, but his essays on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot are absolutely essential for understanding the holidays, for making sense of these holidays. And I think it's worth a separate conversation, not for today, just speaking about these essays. Perhaps we should do that before Rosh Hashanah with some Sacks scholars, before the Chagim.
I think it's a really good idea.
Because these are incredible intellectual creations. And I can tell you that for me, as someone who reads them every year, this is my holiday activity. Before the holiday and during the holiday, they are illuminating. You cannot understand I cannot understand the holiday without his essays.
Yeah.
So Joanna and Dan, you really shared so many insights about the life of Rabbi Sacks, living alongside him, working with him, and into this tremendous productivity. We're now closing after more than an hour. Can you share with us one closing thought about Rabbi Sacks that inspires you and could inspire us? Dan, why don't you go first?
Sure. Every week at the end of Shabbat, we light a Havdalah candle. Right? A Havdalah candle is a combination of wicks. And for me, whenever I light my Havdalah candle each week, I always think of Rabbi Sacks. And the reason is because we have Kodesh and Chol. We have the kind of religious, the end of the religious side of Shabbat going into the Chol side of the week. And that for me was exactly who he was. He was someone who took those two worlds and he blended them together. And the way that he did that inspired me on Shabbat and inspires me into the week. And it's that memory and that sense of what Judaism is and what Judaism should contribute to the world that was very much who he was. And that's how I remember him. That's what his teachings are. That's who he was. And that's why I think, and I'm confident that his legacy will inspire not just our generation, but generations to come.
Joanna?
Thank you. I think what was amazing about Rabbi Sacks is that after he stepped down as chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, his full title, he actually, as other people said, not necessarily us, he became the global chief rabbi. And at his core, Rabbi Sacks was a teacher of Torah. He taught Torah to Jews and to non-Jews alike with equal passion and with insight and with equal success. He wanted Jews to live, as he called it, a Judaism engaged with the world, one which showed us and the world the integral contribution of our faith that our faith has to make. He, more than any recent Jewish leader, I believe, taught us how to live our Jewish values and how to share these values with the world. As we continue to grapple with how best to preserve his legacy, we know that there are so many other people that would like to do likewise. And that's just not hugely inspiring, but it's also comforting as well. I hope that we can all do him proud and together continue the conversations that he began.
Dan, Joanna, thank you so much. I know for sure, a lot of people will find this extremely interesting and inspiring. So thank you very, very much. And it was really an honor. And to a degree, a pleasure, although we miss him very much, to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gidi.
Friends, if you made it to this point, you just had a rare insight into the operating system of one of the most productive public intellectuals of our time. As we heard, Rabbi Sacks had exceptional discipline and a tremendous passion for his work of making Judaism inspiring for our generation. In quoting Hamilton, Dan captured the essence of Rabbi Sacks. He was writing as if he was running out of time. And indeed, tragically for the Jewish people, In 2020, at the age of 72, Rabbi Sacks ran out of time. We miss him dearly. May his memory be of blessing. Thank you for listening.